This video will show you the analysis of an ethical scenario using virtue ethics. To analyze an ethical scenario using virtue ethics, first you'll have to answer which character traits are involved. Then you'll have to figure out what the excesses and deficiencies are for each of those character traits. An excess of a character trait is when there's too much of it, and a deficiency is when there's not enough. Then, to be virtuous, the balance has to be at the golden mean. That's somewhere in between excess and deficiency. And keep in mind with virtue ethics, this always depends on the context. There are no fixed rules which will tell you in a situation what's right or wrong. In the first scenario, one of your roommates is a slob. He never puts things away or cleans up after himself. So, to teach him a lesson, you stop doing the dishes. You just let them pile up on the counter and in the sink. A week later, your roommate has done nothing. Mold started growing a few days ago, the kitchen smells like sour milk, and the whole apartment has flies. You give up and wash the dishes. Are you virtuous for doing the dishes in those circumstances? First, let's figure out which character traits are involved. There's patience. You are waiting for your roommate to get the message. There's cleanliness. That's right at the heart of the issue. There's being socially aware, knowing how your actions affect other people. There's generosity, whether or not you decide to give up your free time to help your roommate out. There's being hardworking. Maybe it's no big deal for you to do the dishes. There's also being articulate, the ability to express yourself clearly. Have you gone too far or not far enough in trying to express what it is that you're trying to communicate? There's being fair-minded. Is it fair for you to do the dishes? Does your roommate do other things which make up for your having to take on this chore? There's pride. There's also self-respect. And there's being a pushover. Are you being taken advantage of by cleaning up those dishes for your roommate? In order to keep the analysis from getting too involved and bringing in too many details which aren't important, let's choose 3 character traits which are most central to the situation. So, first, let's focus on cleanliness. This is right at the heart of the issue. Are you being virtuous with respect to your standards for cleanliness? Articulate. Part of what's going on in this situation is your attempt to communicate effectively with your roommate. Have you been articulate enough? Do you need to be more articulate? Are you being a pushover? In other words, did you give up too soon? Are you letting your roommate take advantage of you? Of all of these, even though all 10 of them are involved, these 3 seem to be most prominent in this situation. So next, we have to figure out what the vices are for each trait. The vices are the excess, which is too much, or the deficiency, which is too little. I've set up a chart here to organize this. So the traits that we're trying to figure out are cleanliness, being articulate, and being a pushover. Now the thing about being a pushover is that doesn't look like a neutral trait. In fact, it looks like an excess, being too much of something. So in order to fill this in, let's organize it this way. We'll figure out, first of all, what the deficiency of cleanliness is. Well, that would be being a slob. The excessive cleanliness is being obsessive. For being articulate, the deficiency would be being inarticulate. The excess would be being manipulative. That's being able to talk people into doing things which otherwise they wouldn't. For being a pushover, we have to figure out what neutral trait is being a pushover and excessive. Well, how about being considerate? Being considerate is neutral because you can be too considerate and you can be not considerate enough. An excess of being considerate would be being a pushover, and a deficiency would be being inconsiderate. The next step is to figure out whether you've been virtuous. That means, have you found the right balance between excess and deficiency? Have you found the golden mean of cleanliness? Here, I've set out a scale from slop to obsessive. Now, you want the place to be clean, but your standards are really quite understandable. So, here it seems like you've reached the golden mean. The second character trait has to do with how articulate you are. You're somewhere between being inarticulate and being manipulative. Now, in this case, the way the scenario is set up, it doesn't really seem like you tried to talk to your roommate. You tried to pass on an indirect message by just leaving a mess. It doesn't say that you asked your roommate to clean up first. So on this one, you've demonstrated a deficiency of being articulate. You've been a bit inarticulate. The third relevant character trait is being considerate. Here, the scale runs from being inconsiderate to being a pushover. So the question is, did you find the balance? Did you find a good balance between being considerate but not being a pushover? Well, in this case, you tried to be firm and insist on your roommate doing the dishes, but you did eventually give up. So you've gone a little bit far in terms of being considerate, and you've done a bit too much. You've been a bit of a pushover. So on these three central character traits to the scenario, here is how it seems your virtue looks. In conclusion, only one of the three character traits was at the golden mean. That means that you showed more vice than virtue. In other words, you have not been virtuous. You could have handled that situation better. You probably already knew that. To complete the analysis and to come up with a final answer as to what the virtuous thing to do in that situation would be, let's consider, what would X do? X can be any person who is a paragon of virtue for that situation. Someone who's a very good example of good character traits in that type of situation. What would they do in that situation? Well, first, let's consider Tyrion Lannister. Tyrion Lannister is famously articulate. He is a very good talker. In fact, he could not only convince the roommate to do the dishes, he could probably get the roommate to do his homework and to give him his lunch money. In that way, Tyrion Lannister is actually a little bit too articulate. He's all the way into manipulative. So he's not a good example. What about Jon Snow? Jon Snow's not manipulative. On the other hand, Jon Snow can be a bit of a pushover. So he'll just follow along and let the roommate walk all over him until eventually he flips out and kills the roommate. So Jon Snow is also not a great example. What about Hermione Granger? Well, Hermione Granger might go through the same situation, and then she would just use her time traveling device to go back in time and write the roommate a polite note. So in this case, she might be a good example of what the best thing to do is in that situation. Thank you for watching.